Welcome, dear darlings. Today's story is the extras hostile takeover, how I hijacked the script to save the man who wasn't supposed to love me. Subscribe us, dear darlings, and enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The Ink-Stained Morning. The sensation of being written is a subtle, nauseating hum. When Sophie opened her eyes, she didn't just see the room, she felt the descriptions of it pressing against her skin. The sunlight filtered through the sheer organza curtains like spun gold. That was the sentence. She could feel it. It wasn't warm like real sun, it was a static, lukewarm brightness that stayed exactly where the author had placed it. Sophie sat up, her head throbbing. Her last memory was a mundane tragedy, a late night shift at a data entry firm, a third energy drink, and a sharp pain in her chest. Now, she was draped in silk sheets that felt suspiciously like paper. System, she whispered. A translucent blue box flickered into her retinas. Character profile: Sophie Miller. Role: Junior Administrative Assistant to Vanessa von Bloom, primary antagonist. Narrative weight: 0.04%, background noise. Current objective: deliver the lavender latte to Vanessa by 9 a.m. to trigger the spilled coffee inciting incident. Sophie stared at the screen. She remembered this book, The CEO's Fragile Heart. It was a trashy, high-drama web novel she'd binged during her lunch breaks. The female lead was a clumsy florist, and the male lead was a possessive billionaire with anger management issues. And Sophie? Sophie was the girl who gets fired in Chapter 12 because she didn't warn the villainess that the floor was wet. 0.04%, Sophie muttered, sliding out of bed. Her feet hit the floor, which was unnaturally polished. Fine, if I'm just background noise, I can at least enjoy the silence. She spent the next hour testing the limits of her new reality. The world was strangely curated. If she tried to look into a mirror that wasn't specifically mentioned in the text, her reflection was blurry. If she tried to walk down a street that didn't lead to a plot location, her legs felt heavy, like she was walking through molasses. She was a ghost in a machine. By 8:45 a.m., Sophie was standing in the lobby of Bloom & Company, holding a lavender latte. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and ego. Employees moved in synchronized patterns, the salaryman A and office lady B archetypes. Then, the air changed. The atmospheric pressure seemed to drop as the important characters entered the room. Vanessa von Bloom strutted in, her red heels clicking like a metronome. She was gorgeous in a sharp, jagged way, all designer labels and a permanent scowl. Behind her, the air seemed to shimmer with a different kind of energy. Sophie's system didn't ping for the man walking toward the private elevators. In fact, the system seemed to ignore him entirely. He was a titan, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. His face was a masterpiece of cold indifference. This was Killian Vane. In the novel, he was the shadow player, the man who owned the banks the main characters used. He was the overpowered extra, a character so powerful the author didn't know what to do with him, so he was simply left to simmer in the background, a silent god of commerce. As Killian passed the coffee stand, his eyes did something they weren't supposed to do. In the novel, Killian Vane never looked at subordinates. He looked at spreadsheets and horizons. But today, his gaze snagged on Sophie. It wasn't a scripted look. It wasn't the love at first sight spark the male lead had. It was the look of a man who had been staring at a black and white movie for 30 years and suddenly saw a single flash of Technicolor. Sophie froze. The lavender latte in her hand trembled. "You," Killian said. The word was heavy, like a stone dropped into a still pond. The background music of the lobby, a generic, upbeat corporate track, skipped. A literal audio glitch. Vanessa von Bloom stopped mid-stride, her body frozen in a scripted pose, waiting for her coffee. But the script had been interrupted. Me? Sophie stammered. Killian stepped closer. He was tall, impossibly tall, and he smelled of things that weren't in the book: ozone, old parchment, and a sharp, metallic tang of rebellion. He looked down at her status box, which was still floating near her shoulder. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He could see it. "You have a box," he whispered, his voice a low vibration that bypassed her ears and went straight to her bones. "Why do you have a box that says you aren't important? You can see the system?" Sophie gasped, her heart racing. Killian reached out, his hand hovering inches from the blue screen. "I see a world of puppets, Sophie Miller. And I see one girl who looks like she's trying to cut her own strings." Suddenly, the lobby's lights flickered. The system let out a piercing alarm that only Sophie could hear. "Warning. Narrative deviation detected. Error. Extra number 422 is engaging with unauthorized entity. Correction imminent. We have to go, Sophie said, grabbing Killian's hand without thinking. The moment their skin met, the blue box turned red. The spilled coffee incident was supposed to happen now. Vanessa was supposed to scream. But as Sophie pulled the most powerful man in the book toward the exit, the coffee cup stayed perfectly level. The script was breaking, and for the first time in her 2 lives, Sophie felt truly awake. Chapter 2. The Dead Zone. The world did not like being ignored. As Sophie pulled Killian through the revolving glass doors of the Bloom & Company headquarters, the city of Neo-Soul York, as the author had lazily named it, began to protest. The sky, which was supposed to be a flawless, gradient blue for the morning of the gala chapter, suddenly streaked with jagged lines of white noise. The pedestrians, the background crowd, stalled. Some walked into walls and continued to stride in place, their programmed pathfinding failing because the 2 people they were supposed to walk around were no longer in their designated spots. The alleyway, Sophie gasped, pointing toward a narrow gap between a high-end boutique and a parking garage. If we get off the main road, the narrative engine might lose our track. Killian didn't hesitate. He was a man used to leading, but in this distorted reality, he followed her with a grim intensity. As they ducked into the shadows of the alley, the cacophony of the city, the honking horns and the scripted chatter, suddenly cut to absolute, terrifying silence. They had entered a dead zone. In web novels, dead zones are the places the author never bothers to describe. The walls here were a flat, textureless gray. The ground was a void of soft focus concrete. There were no trash cans, no puddles, no details. It was a place where the word count had run out. Killian let go of her hand, but he didn't move away. He leaned back against the featureless wall, breathing heavily. The pressure, it's gone. The pull of the script? Sophie asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. Yes. Killian looked at his hands. For the first time, he wasn't wearing his CEO mask. His expression was raw, almost vulnerable. Every second of my life, I have felt a hook in my chest. Turn left. Sign this. Say, I don't have time for love. It was an iron command. But here, he looked around the empty, gray void, there is no command. It's quiet. He turned his obsidian eyes back to Sophie. You called me an authorized entity earlier. And you knew my name. But in the social registry of this city, you don't exist in my circles. How do you know the system? Sophie took a breath. This was the moment of truth. If she lied, the system might find a way to resync her. The only way to stay free was to remain an anomaly. Because I'm not Sophie Miller, she said. Well, I am now. But I used to be someone else. Someone who read your life like a book. To me, this entire world, your riches, your towers, your loneliness, it was just entertainment for people in a different dimension. Killian stayed silent for a long beat. A normal man would have called for a psych eval. But Killian Vane had lived a life of perfect coincidences and impossible wealth. He already knew deep down that his reality was a cage. Am I a hero in your book? He asked, his voice low. No, Sophie said softly. You're an extra. You're the overpowered CEO, who exists just to show how high the stakes are. You never get a POV chapter. You never get a romance. You just exist to be rich in the background. Killian's laugh was a sharp, jagged sound that echoed in the empty alley. A footnote with $1 billion bank account. How fitting. He stepped toward her, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the small space. The dead zone began to vibrate. Because they were sharing a moment of genuine, unscripted emotion, the world was trying to fill in the blanks. A rusted pipe appeared on the wall. A stray cat flickered into existence, meowing once before vanishing. If I'm an extra, Killian whispered, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind Sophie's ear, then I don't have to marry the heiress the board has picked for me. I don't have to be the cold tyrant the papers describe. His fingers were warm, far warmer than the spun gold sunlight of the scripted world. And if I'm an extra, Sophie replied, her voice trembling, I don't have to be fired. I don't have to be a victim of the villainous's tantrum. I can just be. Then let's be anomalies together, Killian said. Suddenly, the system screamed in Sophie's mind. Critical error. Plot hole detected. Cause. Killian Vane, character ID number 009, is missing from the quarterly earnings scene. Deploying narrative police, the editors. At the end of the alley, 2 figures appeared. They were dressed in featureless black suits, their faces obscured by a blur of digital static. They didn't walk. They glided, and wherever they stepped, the world turned back into perfectly rendered, high-definition reality. The editors, Sophie hissed, her blood running cold. They're here to fix us. If they touch us, they'll reset our memories to the start of Chapter 1. Killian's eyes darkened. The overpowered trait he possessed wasn't just about money, it was about authority. He stepped in front of Sophie, his shoulders squaring. They want their CEO back? Killian growled. Let's see if they can afford me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a fountain pen, a gift from the author meant to sign world-changing contracts. He gripped it like a dagger. Sophie, run toward the boutique. If we can break through the set and get to the unfinished outskirts of the map, they can't follow. I'm not leaving you. You aren't leaving me, Killian said, glancing back with a smirk that was definitely not in his character description. You're leading the way. Now, move. Chapter 3. The unfinished map. The editors didn't move like people. They moved like a cursor dragging an object across a screen, smooth, frictionless, and terrifyingly fast. As they glided down the alley, the gray, featureless walls behind them began to transform. Brick by brick, the world was being re-rendered. The rusted pipes vanished, replaced by the pristine, boring architecture of the original script. They're overriding the area, Sophie shouted. Killian didn't flinch. As the first editor reached him, the man in the black suit extended a hand. The air around the editor's fingers pixelated, a shimmering field of reset energy, designed to scrub away any character development not sanctioned by the author. Killian struck first. He didn't use his fists, he used his narrative authority. I am the owner of the land this alley stands on. Killian's voice boomed, vibrating with the power of his overpowered CEO status. In this story, my word is law regarding property. I deny you access. A golden barrier, glowing with the font of a high-end financial contract, slammed down between Killian and the editor. The entity hissed, its static face flickering violently. It was a clash of logic. The editor represented the plot, but Killian represented the world building. For a moment, the world building won. Sophie, now, Killian yelled. Sophie scrambled toward the back of the boutique. She knew from her reading that the Emerald District was bordered by a developing zone that the author had mentioned in Chapter 4 and then completely forgotten about. It was a place of half-finished sentences and placeholder names. She kicked open a door marked, "Insert text here," and stumbled into a landscape that looked like a sketch. The sky was a pale, unpainted white. The trees were green triangles on brown sticks. It was the unfinished map, the wasteland of a writer's laziness. Killian dove through the door just as the editor's hand shattered his golden barrier. He slammed the door shut, and strangely, the editors stopped at the threshold. They stood in the high-definition alley, staring into the low-resolution sketch world, unable to enter. Why aren't they coming? Killian panted, straightening his jacket. He looked absurdly handsome even in a world made of stick figures and flat colors. They can't, Sophie breathed, her heart finally slowing down. Their software is too advanced for this area. If they come in here, they'll crash the whole book. This place hasn't been edited yet. It's safe. The stillness of the sketch. They walked for what felt like miles through the white void. Occasionally, they passed a building that was just a wireframe, or a sign that simply read, "Shop name." It's strange, Killian said, looking at his own hand. In this area, even he looked a bit more like a drawing than a man. In the city, I felt like I was being watched by a billion eyes. Here, I feel like we're the only two people in existence. In a way, we are, Sophie said. She found a park bench that was surprisingly well rendered, likely a stock asset the author had copy-pasted. She sat down, and Killian joined her, their shoulders touching. The silence wasn't empty, it was peaceful. Without the constant hum of the system, or the pressure to fulfill a role, Sophie felt a strange, giddy lightness. Killian, she said softly. In the book, you were supposed to be the most lonely person in the world. You had everything, but the author wrote you as a man with a heart of stone so the hero would look better by comparison. Killian turned to her. In the pale light of the unfinished sky, his eyes were the only things that looked truly real. My heart wasn't stone, Sophie, he whispered. It was just waiting for a line of dialogue that wasn't a cliché. I've spent years saying, buy, or sell, or leave me. I didn't know I could say, stay. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. The contrast was startling, her skin, warm and soft, against the cold, white space background of a forgotten chapter. If we stay here, Sophie warned, we might be forgotten. We won't have the luxury, the parties, or the status. We'll just be two extras in a void. I've had the luxury, Killian said, leaning in until their foreheads rested against each other. It's remarkably cold. I'd rather be a stick figure with you than a king in a cage. He kissed her then, and it wasn't a scripted kiss. There were no flower petals falling from the sky, the author was too lazy to draw them here, and there was no swelling orchestral music. There was only the heat of his breath and the desperate, rebellious pounding of two hearts that had decided to beat for themselves. But as their lips met, a new sound began to grow. A low, rhythmic thumping. Thump, thump, thump. Sophie pulled back, her eyes wide. Is that the system? No, Killian said, looking up at the white sky. It's coming from above. High above them, a giant, ghostly black line appeared in the sky. Then another. They were letters. Huge, serif font letters that were being typed into the atmosphere in real time. CHAPTERFOUR. THEUNEXPECTEDVISITOR. The author, Sophie gasped. The author is starting a new chapter. They're coming to this location. They're writing us back into the plot. The white void began to shake. Colors started bleeding into the triangles. The unfinished map was being filled in. They're going to turn us back into puppets, Killian growled, standing up and pulling Sophie with him. Unless we give them a plot twist they can't control. Chapter 4. The plot twist. The sky was no longer a blank canvas. It was a battlefield of ink. As the giant letters of the chapter heading solidified, the unfinished map began to undergo a violent transformation. The autofill feature of the universe was kicking in. The wireframe buildings Sophie and Killian had passed moments ago were suddenly being skinned with brick and mortar. The green triangle trees sprouted hyper-detailed leaves with a sickening pop-pop-pop sound. The author is forced rendering the scene. Sophie yelled over the rising wind. They've realized the overpowered CEO is missing, and they're trying to drag the camera over to find you. In the distance, the main characters began to manifest. Leo, the golden-haired male lead, and Arya, the teary-eyed heroine, appeared in a shimmering fountain plaza that hadn't existed 10 seconds ago. They were mid-conversation, their voices echoing with that strange, hollow resonance of a scripted scene. But Arya, Leo's voice boomed, I don't care about the Thorn-Vane merger. I only care about you. It's a forced encounter, Sophie hissed, clutching Killian's arm. The author is trying to use the main characters to anchor the scene. If they see us, we'll be sucked into their subplot as background furniture. Killian looked at the main characters with a mixture of pity and disgust. They look like dolls. Look at his eyes. There's nothing behind them but the next line of dialogue. He turned to Sophie, his jaw set. You said I'm the overpowered extra. You said I fund this reality. If I own the capital of this world, then I own the rights to my own screen time. What are you doing? Killian didn't answer. He walked toward the edge of the newly rendered fountain. He wasn't running anymore. He was walking with the terrifying, measured gait of a man who was about to perform a hostile takeover of reality. System, Killian shouted. He didn't have a blue box like Sophie, but the world itself seemed to flinch at his command. I am Killian Vane. I hold 90% of the commercial assets in this narrative. I am the sole financier of the luxury genre tags this book relies on. The system voice, usually a cold, feminine drone, actually stuttered. Notice. Character ID number 009, Killian Vane, is attempting to access. Authorial privileges? Warning. Insufficient permissions. Check the fine print. Killian roared, his voice drowned out the scripted sobbing of the heroine nearby. In Chapter 2, the author described me as a man whose influence knows no bounds. I am simply exercising the no bounds clause. He reached into the air and grabbed the Chapter 4 heading that was still floating in the sky like a neon sign. With a grunt of effort, he pulled. The sky tore. It didn't bleed, it leaked white light. The letters of the title shattered, falling to the ground like heavy shards of glass. The main characters, Leo and Arya, froze mid-sentence, their mouths hanging open as the logic of their scene was ripped away. Sophie, Killian called out, his hand still gripping the edge of the sky. The author is trying to delete the unfinished map because we're in it. They're trying to move the story to a time skip. If we don't act now, we'll wake up in Chapter 5 with our memories wiped. Sophie ran to him. She saw the cursor of the world, a giant, ghostly shadow, hovering over the plaza, preparing to select all and delete. We need a plot twist, Sophie said, her mind racing through every trope she'd ever read. Something the author can't delete because it's too essential to the commercial appeal of the book. Something that changes the genre. What? Killian asked, the white light from the tear in the sky illuminating his sharp features. Sophie looked at the system box still hovering near her shoulder. She looked at the overpowered CEO, who was willing to break the world for her. A secret marriage, Sophie whispered. The ultimate trope. If we bind our characters together in a way that creates a massive legal and social scandal for the main characters, the author has to keep the footage. They can't delete a shocking reveal, the readers would riot. Killian's eyes sparked with a dark, brilliant joy. A scandal? I've been a bachelor for 300 scripted pages. A sudden marriage to a junior assistant would break the internet and the plot. He grabbed her hand, and together they stepped toward the frozen main characters. System. Sophie screamed. Register a life-binding event. Character number 009 and extra number 422. The ghostly cursor in the sky paused. The delete command flickered and died. The system began to process the new data. Scandal detected. Genre shift. Possessive romance is being overridden by secret marriage drama. Readership interest increasing 500%. Authorial intervention suspended. The fans want to see this. The world suddenly snapped back into full, vibrant color. The editors, in their black suits, vanished, unable to touch a high-value plot point. Leo and Arya blinked, their programming resuming. They turned to see Killian Vane, the richest man in the world, holding the hand of a girl who was supposed to be delivering coffee. Killian? Leo stammered, his scripted jealousy kicking in. What is the meaning of this? This girl, she's a nobody. Killian pulled Sophie closer, his arm wrapping around her waist with a possessiveness that felt very real. She's not a nobody, Leo, Killian said, his voice carrying to every corner of the rendered world. She's the new owner of the Thorn Vane Empire. And my wife. The system let out a triumphant chime. Chapter 4 saved. New title. The CEO's Unexpected Bride. The author had lost. The extras were now the stars. But as the camera of the world zoomed in on them for the big cliffhanger, Killian leaned down and whispered into Sophie's ear. Now that we've hijacked the story, how about we give them a real show? Chapter 5. The Final Rebellion. The world of the CEO's Unexpected Bride was in a state of absolute digital hysteria. Because Sophie and Killian had force-shifted the genre, the system was frantically trying to catch up. New subplots were spawning like wildfire. Suddenly, Sophie's plain apartment was replaced by a sprawling penthouse. Wardrobes filled with designer gowns appeared in the blink of an eye. The main characters, Leo and Arya, were relegated to the background, forced to stand in the corner of scenes and look shocked, while the camera focused entirely on the billionaire and his mysterious wife. But for Sophie and Killian, the luxury was a trap. The author is playing along, Sophie whispered, standing on the balcony of their new, scripted mansion. They realized the secret marriage trope is a goldmine for views. They aren't trying to delete us anymore, they're trying to keep us here forever. Killian joined her, his silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like the dream of every reader, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the edges of the city were starting to loop. I feel it. The pull is back, but it's different. It's not an iron command, it's a golden cage. The script is trying to make me obsessed with you in a way that generates 100 more chapters. He turned to her, his expression grim. If we stay, we become the very thing I hated. We'll spend the next 50 chapters having misunderstandings and jealousy arcs. We'll be trapped in a cycle of scripted passion until the readers get bored and the author cancels the book. We have to end the story, Sophie said, her heart heavy. Not just the chapter, the whole book. We have to reach the end on our own terms. The logic of the finale. The only way to end a novel prematurely is to achieve a resolution so absolute that there is nothing left to write. In a romance, that is usually the wedding. But they were already married by the system. No, Sophie realized, looking at the blue status box that still followed her. The end of a transmigration story isn't the wedding. It's the return. I have to leave the book, and you have to come with me. How? Killian asked. I am made of ink and code, Sophie. I don't have a body in your world. Sophie grabbed his hands. The author wrote you as overpowered. You have enough narrative weight to crush the logic of this world. If we can trigger a world-ending event, a glitch so big the file becomes corrupted, the system will try to eject the foreign data. That's me. And if I'm holding on to you. Killian understood. He looked at the beautiful, fake world around them, the shimmering city, the endless wealth, and didn't hesitate for a single second. Break it all. The Great Corruption. They walked into the center of the Emerald Gala, which was being rerun for the third time because the author loved the setting. Leo and Arya were there, preparing to give a scripted toast. Killian didn't wait for his cue. He walked to the center of the ballroom, grabbed the massive crystal chandelier, and, using the superhuman strength the author had given him for a fight scene in chapter 60, he ripped it from the ceiling. Crash. The music stopped. The guests froze. I reject the script. Killian's voice shook the very foundations of the reality. Sophie stood beside him, accessing her system interface. She didn't follow the prompts. Instead, she began to input her memories of the real world, the smell of rain on asphalt, the sound of a crowded subway, the taste of a cheap burger. She flooded the pure fiction of the book with absolute reality. Critical error. Reality intrusion. Genre collapse. 88%. 94%. 99%. System fatal error. Cannot compute. Cheap burger in high society setting. The ballroom began to pixelate. The guests dissolved into alphabet soup. Leo and Arya turned into static, their voices looping. I only care, I only care, I only care. The ceiling tore open, revealing not the sky, but the literal white page of the document. The giant cursor descended, glowing red, trying to highlight and delete the corruption. It's working, Sophie cried, her body beginning to glow with white light. Killian, hold on, don't let go. The system made one final attempt to save the asset. Offer. Character Killian Vane can remain as god of the story. Price. Extra Sophie Miller must be deleted. Killian looked at the screen. He reached out and, with a snarl of defiance, he literally swiped the screen into oblivion. I don't want to be a god, he shouted into the void. I want to be a man. The end of the ink. The world exploded into a blinding flash of white. For a moment, there was no sound, no light, no text. Just the sensation of two souls drifting in the vacuum between worlds. Then, a weight. Sophie felt the hard, unforgiving cold of a linoleum floor. She smelled the ozone of a blown fuse. She heard the distant sound of a car alarm. She opened her eyes. She was in her studio apartment. The fluorescent light was flickering. Her laptop was open, the screen cracked. It was a dream, she whispered, her heart sinking. Tears pricked her eyes. Killian? She looked around the tiny, dark room. It was exactly as she had left it. The overpowered CEO was gone. The silk and the scandal were gone. She was just Sophie again. Then, she heard it. A heavy, rhythmic thumping on her door. Sophie scrambled to her feet, her legs weak. She threw open the door. Standing in the dim hallway of her apartment building was a man. He was wearing a charcoal suit that was covered in dust and looked 2 sizes too small for his massive frame. He was staring at a fire extinguisher on the wall with an expression of profound confusion. Sophie? The man asked. His voice was lower here, less orchestral and more human. It had a slight rasp to it. Killian? He looked at her, and the cold indifference of the CEO was completely gone. He looked terrified, exhausted, and more alive than anyone she had ever met. This world, Killian said, stepping into her small apartment and looking at her cramped kitchen. It's very loud, and the light isn't spun gold at all. It's actually quite harsh. He looked at his hands, real hands, with pores and small scars and a pulse thrumming in his wrist. Then he looked at her. But you're here, he whispered. And for the first time, I can't hear the author's voice in my head. It's just quiet. Sophie laughed through her tears and threw her arms around him. He wasn't a billionaire here. He didn't have a private jet or a system. He was just an extra in a city of millions. We're going to have to get you a job, Sophie murmured into his chest. And you're going to have to learn how to use a microwave. Killian tightened his grip on her, a genuine, unscripted smile breaking across his face. I think I can handle that, he said. As long as you're in my POV every day. On the floor, Sophie's laptop screen flickered one last time. The web novel site showed a 404 error. The story was gone, the book was closed, and the real story was finally beginning. The end. Thank you for watching, dear darlings. Make sure to like and subscribe the channel for more such videos.